Okay, today in class you're going to be doing a PhET simulation lab, like a virtual lab on vector addition. It's going to be a review of things that we've already covered in the notes and the problems. Now I wanted to do this video to explain a few things about this simulation that'll make it easier as you're working through the handout. And also read and follow all the directions on the handout. It's really self-explanatory. I don't think you'll have many questions about it if you'll read the directions carefully. Now, when you open it up, it's probably going to come to this, what's on the screen right here. You're going to select first, Explore 2D. So we're looking at vectors in 2 dimensions. So when you selected this page here, it'll come up. And one thing about this is a X and Y axis. You can move this up and down if you need to, for whatever vectors or whatever quadrants you're working in. Pretty much, I think the first part is going to be on looking at the resultant vector between two vectors that are perpendicular to one another. And what you can do is select a vector over here from vector A and drag it over to the origin. And one thing about these vectors is that once you look at it, if you look at the top, it's got the length of that vector with the A with the arrow over it. This means the vector A. It means it's got a magnitude of 10 units. It's at an angle of 53.1 degrees at this time. And it gives you the X and Y components. It's got AX and AY. All right, now if you, up here at the top, you got some values, the angle and all that. Press the angle, it will show you that angle that it shows you at the top, and then it will also put the value in there. Now, whenever you you add these right angles, if you have a vector that's pointing due east, it's always got just an X component, no Y component. If it's pointing due west, it's a negative X component and no Y component. If it's north, it has a positive Y, no X, and if it's pointing south, it has a negative Y and 0 X. But if you add these, and if you click on each individual one, these vectors, it's going to tell you at the top the numbers that go with it. So if I drag B over here, and I can put it tip to tail, because that's how we draw vectors, and I can move it any way that I would like and extend it out. If I have these two vectors that are at right angles with one another, we know that to solve that, to find the resultant, which is drawn from the start of the first vector to the tip of the second vector, that way would give us the resultant. We can calculate that using the Pythagorean theorem. Now, if I click on the first vector, it's going to give me the stuff across the top that goes with the first vector. If I click on the second vector and select it, it's going to give me those numbers. It has a magnitude of 15 units, whatever units that might be, meters per second, doesn't matter. It's an angle at 90 degrees because it's due north. It has no X component, has 15 as its Y component. Well, up at the top, if I press sum, it's going to give me the resultant vector. And what I can do is, and it's going to give me the numbers across the top if I select it. S is the sum vector, and it's telling me that it's 17.5 at 59 degrees. And the X component would be 9, the Y component would be 15, because remember, these two vectors, even though at right angles, I can use Pythagorean theorem, but I also, can break them down to their X and Y components and add them together, add the X's together, add the Y's together, and from that, I can find the plugged in Pythagorean theorem. We just take a shortcut since, some point due east has no Y component and something point due north has no X component. We don't have to break them down into components. We don't have to do that if vectors are not perpendicular to one another. But pretty much this S, if I put it here, it's giving me the sum right there, the resultant, and it's telling you what it is. So I didn't have to do the math. It's telling me that the resultant of those two has a magnitude of 17.5 units at 59 degrees. And it tells me what the X component of the sum vector is and the Y component of the sum vector. and you'll have to put these into different charts on the handout. But if I click back on B, it gives me B's numbers. Click back on A, and then it gives me A's vectors numbers, and then I can always, move these out of the way to see the angle that's formed by the resultant. Now, another thing that I can do, if I clear these out, I'll start back with a vector that it might tell me to make a vector that has an x component of something and a y component. So if I made an x component of 10 and a y component of 20, I could make that. Well, I think I can. Well, right there, it might ask you to make that vector right there, and then it would be 22.4 at 63.4 degrees. Another thing you could do, if you look over underneath the components to the right, we have one with an I there. That's what we're in right there. But we can press one beside it to, and it puts our x and y coordinates on the our x and y components on the grid there. It's telling us there at the top, and it's also telling us that right here. And it might ask you to make another vector, change the x and y components, and see if you have the same, if it's the same length of the vector or something. So you have to compare. It's pretty simple. Now the second part of the lab, I think, tells you to go to at the bottom. You see where it says lab. You'll click on this part, and you'll bring this vector out right here. And once you select that, it's telling you that vector is V. It must stand for a velocity vector. And so that's what you'll do on that part right there. And it might ask you if you had a single vector. When you pull this vector out here and you take it off the components, and it's giving me the sum there too if I take that off. And if I just have one vector there and I press sum, it's just going to give me the same vector. But it's going to ask you to compare some numbers that you put in charts, and it's really just a review over what we've covered, and it'll be a good review for the tests that we'll have later on in the week.